I need you to stop whatever you're doing and understand what just happened in Ukraine in the last 12 hours, because this is the kind of event that changes the strategic context of this war and changes it fast. 17 people are confirmed dead tonight. More than 100 people are injured. A 9-story residential building in Kyiv has been collapsed by a direct Russian missile strike. In the city of Dnipro, emergency crews spent the early morning hours pulling bodies from the rubble of a destroyed 4-story apartment block, including the body of a 3-year-old child and the bodies of a mother and her 8-year-old son. In Kharkiv, 10 people, including a child, were wounded. Kyiv's mayor Vitaly Klitschko confirmed that 4 medical facilities were damaged in the capital. Power was cut to 140,000 residents. Thousands of Ukrainian civilians grabbed their bags, their pets, their mattresses, and descended into the Kyiv subway system trying to survive the night. And while all of that was happening on the ground in Ukraine, NATO fighter jets from Poland, Romania, and multiple allied nations were being scrambled into the air to protect the alliance's eastern flank from what had become the most terrifying aerial barrage to hit Ukraine in this entire 4-year war. I have spent my career in military analysis, and I am telling you right now that what Russia did in the early hours of June 2, 2026 was not a military operation in any definition that serious people use for that term. It was a massacre attempt of extraordinary scale directed at a civilian capital and at cities full of ordinary people trying to live their lives. And the numbers behind what Russia launched last night are numbers that should make every defense analyst, every NATO planner, every head of government in the Western Alliance sit down and seriously reckon with where this war is heading. Let me give you the full picture because the raw numbers alone are staggering, and then I am going to walk you through every dimension of what they mean. Ukraine's Air Force confirmed it in a statement posted to Telegram. Russia launched 73 missiles and 656 drones into Ukraine in a single night. 656 drones, 73 missiles. Ukraine's air defenses intercepted or suppressed 40 of the missiles and 602 of the drones. That means 33 ballistic missiles and 54 drones punched through Ukrainian air defenses and found their targets in populated cities across the country. And among those 73 missiles, Russia deployed 8 Zircon hypersonic missiles. According to Reuters, that was the largest number of Zircon hypersonic missiles used in a single attack during the entire course of this war. 8 hypersonic missiles in one night against one country. That is not a military operation responding to a battlefield development. That is a calculated escalation designed to overwhelm air defense systems and to produce maximum civilian casualties and maximum psychological terror. And here is the specific detail about how Russia chose to deploy these weapons that tells you everything about the intent behind this attack. The 33 ballistic missiles that Russia fired are the category of weapon that Ukraine's existing air defense architecture finds hardest to intercept. Ballistic missiles travel on trajectories and at speeds that the lower-end interceptor systems simply cannot handle. Only the Patriot air defense system, which Ukraine has in limited numbers because the United States and its European allies have not provided enough of them, can reliably engage incoming ballistic missiles. Russia knows this. Russia's targeting doctrine is not random. The heavy use of ballistic missiles in the June 2nd attack was a deliberate operational choice designed to exploit the specific gap in Ukraine's defensive coverage. Russia is not trying to hit military facilities with this volume of fire. Russia is trying to exhaust Ukraine's most capable interceptors and then push missiles through the resulting gaps onto apartment buildings, schools, clinics, and civilian infrastructure. And it worked last night in the most devastating way. In Kyiv's Podilsky district, a 9-story apartment building was struck directly and collapsed. Ruslan Stefanchuk, the chairman of Ukraine's parliament, confirmed it. A 9-story residential building. People were home. People were sleeping. The building fell. In Dnipro, a 4-story apartment block was partially destroyed. The bodies of a 3-year-old, a mother, and her 8-year-old son were pulled from the wreckage by emergency crews working in the dark. Those are not statistics. Those are 3 specific human lives ended in the rubble of their own home at 3 or 4 in the morning. And then Zelensky's government confirmed what his people had been dreading since earlier in the week when Russia pre-announced this attack was coming. This was the 3rd heavy assault on Kyiv in under a single month. 3 times in less than 30 days, Russia has launched a mass aerial attack on Ukraine's capital city. And each time, the Russian Defense Ministry has claimed it was targeting military industrial facilities and military command infrastructure. Look at what it actually hit. 9-story apartment buildings, a kindergarten, a clinic, 4 medical facilities. Residential buildings across 8 Kyiv districts, a car dealership, warehouses, the homes of ordinary people. Olena Dniprovska, 65 years old, gave a statement to reporters after this attack. She described going into the corridor with her phone. She said before she understood what was happening, everything fell on her, the glass, the door blown off by the blast wave. She ran out and called for her husband, who had also been knocked down by the explosion. Her apartment, she said, had no doors, no windows, no balcony. You could step from the room directly onto the street. That is the reality that Kyiv's residents are living right now. And Russia's defense ministry says it was targeting military infrastructure. Now let me take you to NATO's response, because what happened in Brussels, in Warsaw, in Bucharest, and at airfields across the eastern flank of the alliance in the hours during and after this attack is as important as the attack itself. Poland's operational command scrambled military jets and activated Allied forces to secure Polish airspace. Their statement, posted on X, said clearly that Polish and Allied air forces had begun operating in the national airspace due to the activity of long-range Russian air forces conducting strikes on Ukrainian territory. This was not a precaution. This was a direct operational response to a threat that Poland's military commanders judged to be real and proximate. When your allies' cities are burning under 73 missiles and 656 drones, and some of those weapons are flying close to your border, you scramble your aircraft. That is not overreaction. That is basic alliance defense in practice. In Romania, the defense ministry deployed German Eurofighter Typhoon aircraft and Romanian F-16S to monitor airspace at the border with Ukraine following the Russian strikes in the vicinity of the river border. Romania's southern flank sits along the Danube directly across from Ukrainian territory that Russia has been systematically targeting for months. Romanian officials confirmed tracking aerial contacts and deploying fighters in response. The alliance is not watching this from a comfortable distance. It is responding in real time every night to an aerial threat environment that its planners never anticipated having to manage at this intensity and at this frequency. And here is the tactical dimension that NATO's defense planners are now wrestling with that most media coverage is not fully explaining. The combination of weapons Russia deployed on June 2nd, ballistic missiles, Zircon hypersonic cruise missiles traveling at approximately 8 to 9 times the speed of sound, Kinzhal air-launched hypersonic missiles, Iskander ballistic missiles, and over 600 Shahed-type drones simultaneously, is not a random mix. It is a calculated layering of different threat categories designed to simultaneously saturate multiple layers of an air defense system. The drones go first and in the largest numbers. They exhaust the lower-tier interceptors, the shorter-range systems, the systems that are cheaper to operate but have limited magazines. Then, as those interceptors are being depleted, the ballistic missiles come in on trajectories and at speeds that demand the most capable and most limited interceptors, the Patriot batteries, the SAMPT systems, the most advanced Western-supplied systems that Ukraine has in insufficient numbers. The Zircon hypersonic missiles add a third layer of complexity because their speed and maneuverability at hypersonic velocities pushes the engagement windows for even the best air defense systems to the very edge of what is technically achievable. The result of this combined attack profile is that even a well-supplied air defense network will have gaps. Ukraine's network is not well supplied. Zelensky himself acknowledged this publicly on Tuesday in his evening address, paraphrasing his words accurately, that the current level of air defense supplies does not allow Ukraine to intercept a significant proportion of the missiles. That is a sitting president telling his people and the world that his country's defenses are being overwhelmed. Not gradually. Now, tonight. And the intelligence picture makes this moment even more urgent. Zelensky issued a warning on Tuesday evening after the June 2nd attack that, according to Ukraine's intelligence services, Russia may launch another large-scale aerial attack that same night. He said this while his country was still pulling bodies from the rubble of the previous night's strike. 2 attacks in 2 consecutive nights. 3 heavy attacks on Kyiv in under a month. This is not a pattern of isolated provocations. This is a sustained and escalating campaign of aerial terror directed at a civilian capital by a nuclear-armed state. Now, I want to give you the political context that sits underneath this military reality, because the timing of this attack and the context in which it happened is not coincidental, and the people in this conflict know it is not coincidental. The attack on June 2nd came as Washington was processing the complete failure of the June peace deadline that the Trump administration had set as its target for ending the war. It came as U.S. brokered talks had produced no progress on ceasefire, no framework agreement, no common ground on any of the core issues. It came as the Trump administration's attention was being pulled toward Iran, toward U.S. trade policy, toward domestic political matters that compete for presidential bandwidth, and Putin signaled exactly what he thinks about the peace process in his own statements following this attack. He told reporters that Ukraine's drone strike on a college dormitory in Starobilsk in the Russian-controlled Luhansk region, an attack Ukraine says targeted a Russian drone pilot training center, had given the war a whole new dimension. Putin's words paraphrased accurately, a whole new dimension. That is Putin telling the world that he is using the Starobilsk incident as justification for a response that included 73 missiles and 656 drones fired at Ukrainian cities and killed 17 civilians, including children. This is the pattern that has repeated itself throughout this war. Russia uses Ukrainian military operations or alleged Ukrainian strikes on Russian-controlled territory as the public justification for mass aerial attacks on Ukrainian cities. The justification is always framed in the language of proportional military response. The actual result is always the death of civilians in apartment buildings. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha gave the clearest strategic summary of what is actually happening. He said, and I am paraphrasing accurately, that Moscow is losing on the battlefield and that no number of missiles can change this. He said what can change is Russia's ability to continue terror, and he urged Ukraine's partners to act, not only condemn. He called on Western countries to unlock European funding through NATO's procurement mechanisms so Ukraine can obtain more American weapons and ammunition, including Patriot air defense systems. He urged an increase in investment in Ukraine's own long-range strike capabilities. He demanded new sanctions against Russia, and he called for Ukraine's European Union membership negotiations to be advanced. Each of those specific demands represents a different dimension of the pressure that Ukraine's government is applying to its Western partners to respond to what happened on June 2nd with something more than a press statement and a condemnation. Because condemnations, as horrifying and sincere as they may be, do not intercept ballistic missiles at 3 in the morning. Let me talk to you now about the Patriot system specifically because it is at the center of the military argument that Ukraine's government is making, and it deserves a serious technical explanation. The MIM-104 Patriot is a surface-to-air missile defense system developed by the United States and operated by multiple NATO allies. It is specifically designed to engage ballistic missiles and certain categories of cruise missiles. Ukraine currently operates a small number of Patriot batteries. They have been extraordinarily effective. Ukrainian forces have used Patriot systems to shoot down Russian aircraft, including the advanced Su-34 strike fighters, at ranges that surprised military analysts. They have intercepted Russian ballistic missiles in ways that created genuine operational disruption to Russian strike planning. The problem is numbers. Ukraine has far fewer Patriot batteries than it needs to provide comprehensive coverage of its major cities. A single Patriot battery covers a specific geographic area. Cities like Kyiv, Dnipro, Kharkiv, and Zaporizhzhia are separated by large distances. When Russia launches 73 missiles and 656 drones simultaneously at multiple targets across the country, the limited number of Patriot systems cannot be in all the places they need to be at the same time. Russia knows this and exploits it deliberately by distributing its strikes across wide geographic areas to dilute the defensive coverage and find the gaps. Ukraine has been asking for additional Patriot batteries since the early months of this war. NATO allies have provided some. It has not been enough. On June 2, 2026, the consequence of that insufficiency was 17 dead civilians and a 9-story apartment building collapsed in Kyiv's Podilsky district. Zelensky said it explicitly and on the record after this attack, paraphrasing his words, that Europe needs its own anti-ballistic defense so that this war can finally end, and that Ukraine urgently needs help from the United States in supplying missiles for Patriot systems. He asked for partner support and for effective responses to the attack. He is not asking for a blank check. He is asking for the specific system that could have intercepted the ballistic missiles that killed his people last night, and that he knows will be fired again tonight. Now let me give you the bigger strategic picture because what happened on June 2nd does not exist in isolation. It is the latest and most deadly manifestation of a Russian aerial campaign that has been escalating in intensity throughout the spring and early summer of 2026. On May 24th, Russia fired 600 drones and 90 missiles at Kyiv in a single night, including the Oreshnik nuclear-capable hypersonic ballistic missile. That was the largest aerial assault on Kyiv in the entire 4 years of the full-scale war. Then on June 2nd, Russia followed it with 656 drones and 73 missiles, including 8 Zircon hypersonic missiles, in the highest concentration of that weapon ever deployed in a single attack. The scale is increasing. The diversity of weapons being deployed simultaneously is increasing. The death toll on individual nights is increasing. And the pace, with 3 heavy attacks on Kyiv in under a month, is accelerating in ways that suggest Russia has made a strategic decision to sustain this level of aerial pressure indefinitely. The Russian Defense Ministry's official description of the June 2nd strikes claimed the military conducted a massive strike with long-range precision weapons on military-industrial facilities across 7 Ukrainian regions: Kyiv, Zaporizhzhia, Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Poltava, Khmelnytsk, and Sumy. 7 regions struck simultaneously in a single night. That is not the targeting pattern of a force going after discrete military infrastructure. That is the targeting pattern of a campaign designed to stretch air defense coverage to the breaking point across the entire country at once, find the gaps, and push missiles through those gaps onto whatever is underneath them, which turns out, every single time, to be apartment buildings, schools, clinics, and the homes of ordinary people. Now let me address the one thing that is going to be different about how NATO responds to this attack compared to previous attacks, because the June 2nd strike has specific characteristics that are forcing the alliance to have conversations it has been deferring for months. The scale of this attack, 729 total weapons launched in a single night, combined with the use of 8 Zircon hypersonic missiles in a record deployment, and the confirmed deaths of 17 civilians, including children, has created a moment where the political cost of minimal response is beginning to exceed the political cost of substantial response. Zelensky's foreign minister explicitly called for NATO partners to act, not condemn. Ukraine has formally requested emergency meetings of both the United Nations Security Council and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe to coordinate an international response. Those requests signal that Kyiv believes the June 2nd attack crosses a threshold that requires multilateral institutional response, not just bilateral diplomatic messages. The Patriot missile supply question is now urgent in a way that it was not before June 2nd. When Russia is deploying 33 ballistic missiles in a single night and 8 Zircon hypersonic missiles in the same attack, and they are hitting 9-story residential buildings, the argument for withholding Patriot interceptor missiles from Ukraine becomes harder and harder to sustain politically. Every Patriot interceptor not sent to Ukraine is a potential apartment building that stands or falls, depending on what Russia chooses to fire next. And Russia has now demonstrated that it will fire ballistic missiles at Ukrainian cities repeatedly, at scale, with increasing frequency, until something changes in the equation. What needs to change in that equation is the supply of the one system that can intercept what Russia is sending. The June 2nd attack also demonstrates something critical about Russian military strategy that I want you to understand clearly, because the Kremlin's communication after this attack was revealing in exactly the way that serious defense analysis requires you to pay attention to. Putin's claim that the attack was retaliation for a Ukrainian drone strike on a dormitory in Starobilsk follows a pattern that has been consistent throughout this war. Russia announces a military action with a specific justification. The justification almost always involves a Ukrainian attack on a Russian-controlled target. Ukraine almost always denies the characterization of the target. And Russia's response is always disproportionate by any military standard, targeting civilian infrastructure across multiple cities simultaneously. The function of the justification is not military logic. It is political narrative management for domestic audiences and for international audiences that might be persuadable. Russia needs a story to tell that is not "we are deliberately targeting civilian apartment buildings in a European capital city." The Starobilsk dormitory gave Putin a story for June 2nd, the same way previous incidents have given him stories for previous attacks. The pattern is so consistent and so predictable that it is no longer credible as a genuine operational explanation. Ukraine's foreign minister said it directly, paraphrasing his words accurately, that Moscow is losing on the battlefield and that missiles cannot change this. Ukraine's government understands the Russian logic precisely because they have been living inside it for over 4 years. When Russia cannot achieve decisive advances on the ground, it escalates in the air. When diplomacy fails to produce the concessions Russia wants, it escalates in the air. When the peace deadline set by the United States passes without agreement, it escalates in the air. The aerial campaign is not a battlefield tool. It is a coercion instrument. And history tells us that coercion through aerial bombardment of civilian populations has a dismal track record of producing the outcomes the coercing power wants. It did not break London during the Blitz. It did not break Hanoi during the Vietnam War. And it has not broken Kyiv in 4 years and 3 months of constant Russian attacks. What it has done, and what the June 2nd attack will continue to do, is harden Ukrainian public resolve, accelerate Western political support for providing more capable defensive weapons, and add entries to the documentation of Russian war crimes that the International Criminal Court is systematically building for the day when accountability arrives. Let me tell you what I believe the next 30 days look like based on everything that the evidence is telling us right now. Russia has demonstrated an intent and a capability to sustain mass aerial bombardment of Ukrainian cities at a pace that the current Ukrainian air defense architecture cannot fully manage. The June 2nd attack was the third heavy attack on Kyiv in under a month. Intelligence reporting available to Zelensky suggests another attack was being prepared for the same night. The pressure on Ukraine's air defense inventory of interceptor missiles is real, documented by Zelensky himself in public statements, and will not ease unless additional Patriot interceptors are provided by Western allies. NATO's eastern flank allies, Poland, Romania, the Baltic states, are being forced to scramble jets and raise air defenses to maximum readiness during every major Russian attack because the density and range of Russian aerial weapons means that any given strike could include trajectories that take weapons near or across NATO borders. The gap between the threat that is real and the defensive capability that exists is a gap that the alliance must close. It must close it now, not at the next budget cycle, not after the next summit, not after the next failed peace deadline. Right now, tonight, while Ukrainian families are looking at buildings that used to be their homes and asking whether the West has the will to give them the tools to protect themselves. Zelensky's ask is not complex. It is not asking for offensive ground forces. It is not asking for a NATO declaration of war against Russia. He is asking for interceptors for the Patriot system that is already operational in Ukraine and that is already proven to save lives when it has missiles to fire. The 17 people who died on June 2nd cannot be brought back by decisions made tomorrow or next week. But the next 17 and the 17 after them, and the families in the Kyiv apartment buildings who are going to sleep tonight not knowing if their building will be standing in the morning, they are waiting for an answer that the Western alliance has the power to give. Watch what the NATO members do in the next 72 hours. Watch whether Patriot interceptors begin moving toward Ukraine. Watch whether the Graham-Blumenthal Russia sanctions bill moves in the United States Senate. Watch whether the European Union unlocks the NATO procurement funding that Ukraine's foreign minister specifically requested. Because 17 deaths and a 9-story apartment building collapsed in a NATO-adjacent capital city should be the moment when watching and condemning gives way to acting and supplying. The drones are still being loaded in Russia tonight. The Zircon missiles are still fueled, and Ukraine's air defense teams are working with the inventory they have, not the inventory they need, to stand between those weapons and the civilians in the shelters beneath Kyiv's streets. The world is watching. The question is whether it is watching and waiting, or watching and deciding to act before the next morning's body count tells us what a failure of Western resolve actually costs in human lives.